So Cedric literally built the equipment out of wood. And he showed me pictures of like a Smith machine and a shoulder press, and like, this is insane to me. I definitely get value from just talking to people. Like anybody that comes on my podcast, when you came on or any of the guys come on, it's not just the quiet time either. I actually learn quite a bit, you know, and I have coaches on, and I actually just enjoy hearing other people's stories. Like I like hearing, you know, Branch Warren tell his backstory of growing up and having his parents divorce and having to make ends meet on his own, or Dorian Yates' story of leaving his home when he was 16, or whatever the story may be. I find it very interesting to see how everybody got to where they are at this point. So there's a bunch of different like buckets it fills by doing the podcast. Something I didn't expect, to be honest with you.
What's one of the stories that resonates the most from you? Just named off two real quick, but what are a couple of the big ones that are just
honestly
really cool to listen to?
Cedric's story. I can't remember the name of it, so I'm going to butcher this.
Yeah,
my memory is really bad. But Cedric was part of a group that would in military that would go out in Iraq and help the other group that was out first if they had something break down with one of their vehicles or something like that. He was part of a group that would go out and help the other group get set back up and back on their way. And he told a story on the podcast about going out and being in the middle of a gunfight. And I'm like, this is Cedric. This is the guy like I stood at a booth with for hours on end, and we just signed autographs. And he's telling me about this gunfight in the middle of the desert. I'm like, it's just interesting to see, because you don't think of these people in this light. Like, I knew he was a sergeant or a staff sergeant. I knew he was in the military, but we didn't really talk about it. So having him on the podcast and telling me these stories, I'm like, this is wild. Or having him tell me the story about building his own gym equipment. You know, they wouldn't bring gym equipment for the soldiers. So Cedric literally built the equipment out of wood. And he showed me pictures of like a Smith machine and a shoulder press, and like, this is insane to me. So stuff like that. I mean, stuff like Kamal was recently on and telling me about winning the Worlds 13 times in a row, and how life was in the Middle East as a competitor and how much they got paid, and these kind of things. These things are fascinating to me, because I'm like, I don't know, I guess you could say I'm sheltered. I didn't really, you know, I just kept to myself. I did my own thing. I thought everybody just bodybuilded the way I did. And when I hear these stories, I'm like, or when I hear Branch Warren's story, I'm like, man, this guy came from nothing. Like, dad left him. Mom didn't make a lot of money. I think he said they were living in their car at one point. And now look at them. And you're like, fuck, people complain about a lot of shit they have no reason to complain for. Right? Like, it almost feels like the more people I interview, the people that complain the most are the people who've had the most. And the people who've had less are the ones that are just thankful. So, I don't know, there's a lot to gain. I found something in the podcast that I didn't expect, which was there was a lot to gain from just talking to other people.
Well, I think those stories are huge, because your time in the sport, the magazines were still a thing, and you kind of saw them filter out. So you're kind of bridged that gap, right? Where the way bodybuilding used to be is the magazines controlled the narrative. You know, so while my stint in competing in bodybuilding was very short, you know, I've always followed, you know, the sport. Wasn't my biggest passion as strength as otherwise, but I followed it. And you read Flex and you watch these magazines, like, man, these guys are rolling, man. You know, here's the closet, here's the car, here's all this other stuff. And that was the story the magazine editors were putting out for people to see. Where the internet changed that in a good way, because now you see the real story. Well, kind of, right? You see more of their real story through their own Instagram, their own highlight reels, sometimes the lower light, but not so much. Where through a longer form podcast, if you're talking to these guys, you're doing what you actually just said, is most of us live in a bubble, right? And we don't understand that we all know we have our own history and our own background.
Yeah.
But we always seem to forget, so does everybody else.
That's right.
Because we only see what the magazines are putting or what's on whatever they're putting on social until you talk to them. Then you're like, holy shit.
Yeah.
You know, we got way more in common than I thought we did.
Yeah.
You know, because even people in all these industries, the top 4%, or the top people who put training as the top 4 priority.
Yeah.
In all those industries, you can have people that completely don't like each other, but they're still going to agree on 90% of the things once they sit down and talk.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just that same background, but you don't see that. And you don't hear their stories a lot. Where when you can provide that opportunity